So what's going on, guys? It's Jay, it's the Boxing Boy. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and like the videos. It really is appreciated if you guys could do that for me. So last night we had a very controversial decision in the sport of boxing. George Kambosos defeated Maxi Hughes via a very controversial majority decision. The judges scored the fight 114, 114, overruled by the other two judges 115, 113 and 117, 111, both to George Kambosos. And the 117, 111 scorecard, in my opinion, was an absolute disgrace. There is no way you could give George Kambosos 9 rounds in that fight. There is no... You could watch that fight 100 times and you're not giving George Kambosos 9 rounds in that fight. That is absolutely ludicrous. I scored the fight 8-4 to Maxi Hughes, maybe 7-5. I feel like you have to be really generous. I mean, really generous. I mean, you have to give a lot, or maybe even all of the close rounds to George Kambosos for it to be a draw. There is no way you can score the fight 117, 111 to George Kambosos. Even the 115, 113 I thought was a little bit out there. You know, giving it George Kambosos by a round. But 117, 111, 9 rounds to 3, just absolutely ludicrous. And that judge needs to be investigated, in my opinion, because it's just insulting people's intelligence. People are watching these fights and they're thinking, you know, afterwards when these scores get put in, you're thinking, did I watch the same thing as these judges? Because it's an absolute joke. Because they're just absolutely wild. Maxi Hughes was the one who controlled the fight. He was the one who was countering, making George Kambosos miss. He was the one landing the cleaner shots, in my opinion. George Kambosos was the aggressor in the fight. He was the one trying to make something happen, but it was very ineffective aggression. Like, I'm not someone who's against, you know, scoring the fight to a guy who's being the aggressor if the guy is landing punches, if he's being effective with the aggression. But George Kambosos, for me, was very ineffective with what he was doing last night, and Maxi Hughes was the one who was being patient. The fight was fought at his pace. He was the one who seemed like the ring general in there for a majority of the rounds. So, you know, it's just ridiculous. Like, when you watch a fight and you think, yeah, this guy's won the fight clearly, and then it just goes totally the other way. And that is the problem with the sport of boxing right now. And you've got guys like Maxi Hughes, you know, very nice blue-collar guys, you know, a guy who came up the hard way in the sport of boxing, a guy who only a few years ago, 3 years ago, had a full-time job as well as training and boxing professionally, a guy who was fighting in 4-rounders in his local area in leisure centres, to 3 years later being ranked by the Ring magazine. What a story. 7 straight wins, managed to pick up the IBO title, win a British title. That's something he really wanted to do, and he achieved that. And then he went one step further and picked up the IBO title. And then last night he main evented a top rank card in America against a former lineal lightweight champion of the world, and he outclassed him, in my opinion, in majority of the rounds, and didn't get the victory. So now he's going back to England, you know, with no belt and a loss on his record, whereas George Kambosos will probably go into a big fight, if that's the fight for the vacant world title, if Devin Haney decides to vacate and move up to 140 pounds, which looks like is happening. Or, you know, he fights somebody like a Shakur Stevenson. Like, Maxi Hughes could have been in that position, had a big fight, had a big financial payday, you know what I mean, change his life, change his family's life. But it just didn't happen. He was treated ridiculously, you know, by the judges. It was 117, 111. It's thanks for coming, Maxi, in my opinion, giving him that kind of scorecard. You know, giving George Kambosos that scorecard. It's just, you know, George Kambosos, he's the one who's signed by Top Rank. He's the guy who was seen as the A-side. And, you know, he's just going to get the decision. Even though he's not at home, he's fighting in America, he's an Australian fighter. This fight was on neutral territory, but it didn't feel like that when the scores were announced. It felt like, you know, George Kambosos is their guy. He's the guy they've just signed, so he's the one who's going to get the rub of the green. And in my opinion, George Kambosos isn't an elite lightweight. What he did against Teofimo Lopez, that was a great victory. I'm not going to take that away from him. That was a fantastic performance that night. Yeah, you can say, Teofimo Lopez maybe compromised and overlooked George Kambosos in my opinion, you know, George Kambosos deserves the credit for that victory that night. That was a great win, and he deserved to become the unified champion that night. But then he fought Devin Haney over 2 fights, 24 rounds, and you could say that he didn't win one of them rounds. And then he goes in there against Maxi Hughes last night, who, you know, like I said, good fighter, good solid fighter, good solid pro, but he's not an elite fighter in my opinion either, but he outclassed George Kambosos in there. He showed that he was a better boxer than George Kambosos. He was exploiting George Kambosos' mistakes in there, making him miss, making him fall short. So for me, he's just food for somebody like a Shakur Stevenson or a Tank Davis. Don't put George Kambosos anywhere near Shakur Stevenson or a Tank Davis. That would not end well for him whatsoever. They're just operating on a higher level. Keyshawn Davis, even though he's only had 9 professional fights, I'd favour him against George Kambosos. And people are saying, oh, I'm not giving George Kambosos the respect, you know, former lineal champion. George Kambosos, what he did that night against Teofimo Lopez, that was so impressive, you know. Became the lineal champion, you know, big underdog. He'll always have that night at the Hulu Theatre in Madison Square Gardens. He'll always have that night. But for me, I just don't think he's an elite level fighter, and I think the elite guys at lightweight would beat him and beat him soundly. We've already saw it when he fought Devin Haney, who is an elite level fighter. 24 rounds. You know, it's hard to give him 1 round out of any of them 24 rounds, in my opinion. And I think guys like Shakur, Tank, even guys like I said, Keyshawn Davis, Andy Cruz made his professional debut the other week. Probably one of the greatest amateur fighters I've ever seen. I'd pick him to beat George Kambosos right now. Maxi Hughes, you know, a guy who's totally changed his career around over the past few years. Impressive. But for me, he's not an elite fighter. But he still showed last night that he was a better boxer than George Kambosos. He was a better boxer in there in terms of ring generalship, in terms of controlling the pace of a fight. He was the one who dictated his game plan in the fight. And George Kambosos struggled. So, like I said, the 117, 111, absolutely disgraceful, and boxing needs to change. But we say this every time we make these videos, we go on Twitter, we talk about it, saying that it needs to change, these judges need to be held accountable, but it never happens. And it's a shame, because guys like Maxi Hughes work so hard, you know, all the hard work and dedication not to get the victory after, you know, he put on a performance like that. It's just, you know, sad. So yeah, comment below in the comment section. What did you guys think? Did you think Maxi Hughes did enough, you know, to get the win? Do you think it's controversial? Do you think it's a robbery? Comment below in the comment section. I'm out.